My track Shardik. This is track 1 of volume 2 of my Dark Tower music series. Volume 1 covered the events of Book 1, The Gunslinger, and Book 2, The Drawing of the Three. This volume 2 contains books 3, 4 and 5, The Wastelands, Wizard and Glass, and The Wolves of Vakala. So we open with the beginning of The Wastelands. Roland, the last gunslinger in a world that has moved on, has drawn Eddie and Susanna from our world and into his own, the gunslinger's world being parallel to our own, or rather I should say there are many, if not infinite, parallel worlds, and Roland's world exists at the center and contains the Dark Tower, which is the central point around which all of reality, time and space revolves. Roland has been on a quest to reach the tower for an unspecified but apparently incredible amount of time, and he has now brought two, at first unwilling, companions from our own world, Eddie, a 23-year-old heroin addict from New York in the 80s, and Susanna, who is the newly formed personality of Odetta Holmes, a woman from New York in the 60s who had a split personality in the form of Detta Walker, her two separate halves being merged into the new persona Susanna in Book 2. Now, the three are travelling through a forest. Oh, I should mention, Susanna, Odetta, lost her legs when she was pushed in front of a subway train, and she's in a wheelchair, which makes travelling anywhere that doesn't have roads or paths rather difficult. And Roland is training them to become gunslingers. In fact, right at the moment we begin, Roland is off training Susanna while Eddie is rediscovering his love of whittling. He likes to make things out of wood. He'll make something very important later on in the story. So, Eddie's chilling out under a tree, whittling away, when he's attacked by this giant bear. It's like 70 feet tall. So Roland and Susanna hear the commotion and come running. Roland has to carry her on his back, and they find Eddie stuck up a huge tree. The bear's trying to shake him loose, and they notice a radar dish type thing on its head. It turns out it's a cyborg bear created by the Great Old Ones to be a guardian of the beam. I'll talk more about the beams when we get to the track Blue Heaven, as it's pertinent to that part of the story. Anyway, Susanna has to shoot the radar dish type thing on its head to kill it, and that's what's going on in the track, really. I wanted to start this volume off with a bit of excitement compared to the opening track of volume 1, which has a very long, slow build-up. I really kind of like music that takes its time. I like long, slow build-ups, but not everyone has the patience for that kind of thing. So I made a conscious decision to start this volume off with a bang, literally. There's a few seconds of forest ambience and then a gunshot on the opening beat. I don't remember where I found that gunshot sample. I did have a big library of sound effects that was ripped from an old video game. It could have been from that, or I could have found this one online somewhere at the time. I do know I wanted a very specific sound, a big gunshot with loud echoes. I would have added some processing of my own, like compression and reverb, but the initial sample had to be right. Although saying all that, these sound effects, they're only on the remade version that I did a few years later. I'm not sure which version the listeners will be familiar with, so you may be wondering what the heck I'm talking about. I'll talk more about the remake in a bit. But the original version was recorded around 2007 or 8 and was mostly created using a PlayStation 2 program. There was this series of music creation software that started on the original PlayStation. It's called Music, and then there was Music 2000, and then MTV Music Generator for the PS2. Pretty terrible name for a piece of software, but it was actually pretty nifty, especially for a games console. It was quite good. It was entirely sample based. It had a big library of sound samples which could be manipulated, but there's no actual synthesizing going on, so it was very limited, but it was the best I had at the time. I really liked a lot of the drum samples, and there was some good sounding orchestral instruments and synths on there. That program is all over my Dark Tower stuff. Basically anything that isn't a guitar or bass guitar, it was made in the PS2. So the entire track minus guitars and bass would be programmed on the PS2, and then I'd record each individual instrument onto PC one at a time. I'd have an RGB cable from the PS2 connected to an audio input on my PC. Each track would have a 4-beat click at the start, kind of like a drummer counting 1, 2, 3, 4 at the start of a song, so that they could all be synced up perfectly inside my audio software on PC. A friend had given me a copy of Adobe Audition. It's a very old copy of that. I remember loving that when I could record onto PC compared to the 4-track tape recorder I'd been using when I was growing up. The change from analog to digital was such a blessing. No more hissy tape, no loss of sound quality when combining tracks, mixing things down. I didn't even need to bounce tracks down anymore. I wasn't limited to 4 tracks only. I could record as many as I needed. That was cool. The only limiting factor being the processing power of my PC, and I do remember hitting that wall a few times. Now once all that, the drums, synths and orchestral parts, if there are any, I think there's only a string section in Shardik. Once all that was recorded and synced up on PC, I could add all the guitar tracks. I just jack my guitar in through the same audio input, straight out from my effects pedal. At that time I was using a Zoom 1010, simple little box of tricks that I'd had since I was a teenager. I really enjoy layering multiple guitar tracks on top of each other, like adding harmonies and all the rhythmic parts. That's my favourite part of the whole process really. Not necessarily the guitar parts, but building the track, seeing or hearing the idea come to life. I'd spend like 2 or 3 days on the whole recording process. Backing track would have taken a week or so to make, but it was writing that's the longest part of the whole process. Coming up with an idea and developing it in my head is always the hardest part for me. It takes the longest. Once I start and I start putting it all together, that's when I start enjoying what I'm doing. I think that's my strength, I think. Rather than actual guitar playing, I've never been a great guitarist. I'm alright and I can pick up a song easily enough, but never been able to shred like some of my favourite players like Yngwie Malmsteen or Steve Vai. But I suppose Shardik is like kind of like my little attempt to do something like those guys. I don't think it succeeded really, but it was fun to make and I was pleased with it at the time. Now the remade version I did with the sound effects at the start, I did that when I got hold of Cubase a few years later, and an awesome piece of software called Easy Drummer. That's a great piece of kit, much more realistic sounding drums than the ones on the PS2. And that's when I added some keyboard parts to the verse sections. They were programmed in Cubase and made with, I'm pretty sure it was a VST called TAL Noisemaker. That was a pretty cool little synth I used a lot back then. This would have been around 2013. Terry helped me with those keyboard parts. Terry, my lovely wife and love of my life. She had a copy of Cubase and I would have sent her the file with some basic ideas and let her tinker with them. She actually has a much better recollection of that whole time. I was drinking back then, too much. I don't remember much about it. In fact, it's a lot I just don't remember at all. It's kind of sad. I do like those keyboard parts though. Having that synth shredding all the way through the verses really adds to the franticness of the battle. That's what it's trying to convey really, how frantic the scene feels. Eddie is unarmed and trapped up this tree, with giant bears shaking him around. This is Susanna's first real gun battle, and she's only practiced against rocks, and I think she's hunted for food. But now she has to take down this huge bear. Oh, and that's it, another thing, I wanted to portray the hugeness of Shardik with those drums at the start, that ba-ba-bum-bum-bum-bum drums. I hope that worked.